Hello, how are you doing? So this will be a seminar, but really the beginning is more of a talk. But partly the team also has said for recording they would like that bit as a chunk. So what I'm going to do is talk for a while, and then we're going to pause. I'm going to get you to talk to the people around you, and then we'll throw it open as we explore this topic. I have a real heart for this topic, and so I forewarn you, I'm going to speak very personally about some of the things that I've found really hard in ministry, and also because I think I want to see a new level of openness in communicating between anyone involved in working in the church in terms of how they are doing and the challenges that sometimes can happen in church life and how that affects us. So let me just talk to you for a little while and share some of my heart. As a new minister, I once filled out an insurance form, and it asked the question, is your work dangerous? I think if I was filling that form out today, I would put a big tick against yes. And whilst ministry in the Church of England today may not involve physical danger, there is, I think, vocational, emotional, and spiritual risks that are significant, and it seems or feels like they are growing. No insurance policy can cover those. These are issues for us to consider information and training and the ongoing ways in which we are a community together of people, presbyters and fellow workers, and the body of Christ. But I think there is an adjustment to be made. I think the challenges are increasing, and some church leaders are finding it difficult to cope. I think most weeks now I hear from somebody one way or another saying, I can't cope, or I can't cope much longer with the way things are. And so the impact of clergy trauma and trauma through working in church and the changing demands, I think, is becoming more apparent. So I want to talk a little bit about developing resilience. And I forewarn you, I don't have answers. I'm not going to give you 3 things at the end, and if you just do these 3 things, all will be fine. In some ways, this is a topic that needs discussing today, and the adjustments and the responses and the understandings that are needed are probably many and complex and are not simplistic, because if it was simplistic, it would be very easy to change and to overcome. I think there is something to understand about the paradox of failure, and we'll get to that in a minute. And we may or may not get time to talk a little bit about anxiety and how a culture of leadership can have an anxious culture or a non-anxious culture, and the importance and the significance of that in our collective work together. 20 years ago, healthy leadership was not my reality. 20 years ago, I was a free church minister. I was 5 years into planting a church. I hadn't had any training for that, but I just felt instinctively that I would be amazing at doing it, the naivety of youth. And I hit a perfect storm of challenges. We had 3 young children. My wife wasn't earning an income. She was at home. Money was very tight, and the church plant at that point was struggling financially, so we were living on a 2/3 income and a single income. We'd eaten through our savings, and at the end of the week, we would literally be counting the pennies for food shopping. We hadn't had a holiday for more than a year. My son had serious kidney problems, and that's recently been resolved through a kidney transplant, but that was all new at the time and very unknown, very serious, very dramatic. Our church administrator's husband had a crisis of faith. He left their marriage, and then he shortly requested that they have a divorce. My wonderful wife had postnatal depression following the birth of our 3rd child, and my co-leader's son was diagnosed with a brain tumor and was hospitalized for 9 months. And as a young and naive person in a free church at the time, my response was to tough it out and to soldier on. I switched into hero mode, because I was called to this, so surely it would be fine. I picked up the slack in the admin from my colleague. I covered for my other colleague who had to step out. We visited them and his son in hospital most days. They needed practical help because they were trying to look after him. My wife and I did the best to support them. I worked extra hard to keep our church running. I stopped taking a day off. I stopped resting. I rushed more, and I powered through. And as is the case with any situation, anything like that, it exposed my weaknesses. I realized now and then that I didn't know how to support my wife properly with what she was going through. My lack of wisdom, my lack of... How are we doing? Lack of awareness of my limits, lack of awareness of how I responded under pressure, all were exposed, as was the shallowness of my prayer life, the absence of a support system of friends. Now, don't worry, no one broke any laws, no one did anything immoral or anything that you need to be worried about in that way, but 2 weeks after I took the funeral for my colleague's son who died, I crashed. And all these plates I'd been spinning caught up with me. And within a few weeks, I had to step out of leading the church that I was leading. And it was, of course, an incredibly difficult time. God was good. We got some help. My wife and I are closer now than we ever have been. I learned a great deal then, and I'm still learning about my limits and my weaknesses. I learnt afresh the importance of my prayer life and of rest and of having an internal barometer and understanding how I'm doing and what do I need. And today I have the privilege to train future leaders of the church, and I carry a heart to see them and others prepared for some of the challenges that can be found in Christian ministry. I wonder if in any way you can relate to what I've said, or maybe you know someone that might be able to relate to it. And I want to ask you a rather dramatic question. And the question I want to ask you is this: if you failed as a Christian leader, how might you fail? I've described me 20 years ago. That's how it panned out for me. That's how those pressures worked for me. Now, I don't want you to answer this now. This is not a turn to the person next to you type question. I think this is a very personal and yet important question. But I suggest to you, you should know what your answer to that is. Where are your weak spots? What are your limits? What are the warning signs of how well you're doing? If you don't know those things, you will be blind to them, and you'll be blind to it if it's developing and nurturing in your life. Of course, there are many different ways in which we can fail, and some of them will come up on the screen. For example, some betrayed, some denied Christ, some have lied to the Holy Spirit, some have been disqualified by their acts, some have grieved the Holy Spirit or departed from the faith, shipwrecked their faith, trampled the Son of Man underfoot, and other examples. The New Testament and the Old Testament describes very readily how some people loved by God, called by God, have, through whatever circumstances and actions, actually fallen folly and have become a casualty of their resilience. Friends, Christian ministry is challenging. If you don't believe me, ask one of our young leaders, Duncan. Ministry can be disappointing as well. Can I have the next slide? What you thought your ministry was going to be, what your ministry is actually like. I know the frustration that when God called you, you were going to change the world. You are going to be a masterpiece of ministry. Your incredible, world-class, diocesan best preaching, the growth of your church. And yet the reality is, so often we can easily be wondering, am I making much of a difference at all? Are we actually advancing forward in God's work? And in the transition to a post-Christendom society and increasingly post-Christian society, the ongoing and past impact of COVID, challenges in the background of numerical decline, significant financial challenges that we've heard about in the historic denominations, all of that and other things add up to Christian leadership. The work that we are centered around thinking about today is a role that's challenged. Not uniquely challenged. Other public service roles also feel that challenge. If you talk to somebody that works in the NHS, for example, they might say very similar things, but we also, in our church, are facing some of these. And I wonder how aware we are of these challenges and how good we are in terms of our response to them. Most church groups now have bold goals for new ministry, and that's the focus of some of the work that I do, but often little consideration has been given to the leadership cost, particularly in pioneering roles. Let me give you an example. A friend of mine told me that he planted a church, and he said after 5 years, they had successfully planted the church. The new church was going really well, except that 4 of the 8 people on the team that started the church now no longer call themselves Christians. Is that a success or a failure? And friends, do any of us want 10,000 of those? I don't. I don't want in the right desire to see more things established, actually make hundreds and thousands of people casualties of the cost of Christian ministry because we weren't prepared and because we didn't prepare them for that. Ed Stetzer says this: many church planters are strategy rich but spiritually bankrupt. I'm a pioneer and I love pioneers, but this is often very true, that pioneers are often winging it. They're just, from one week to the next, and they're just hoping it's going to be all right. And there's lots of strategy and there's lots of ideas, but maybe the stuff that is underneath that keeps it rock solid isn't necessarily in place. You will have your own examples of people who were once serving Jesus and are now, for whatever reason, have stepped out. A burned out leader quitting ministry, somebody who's stepped out of their marriage, faithful saints who now no longer can feel they can serve, or maybe it's just church members who they're taking a rest from Sunday to watch Netflix to recharge. There's a crisis in resilience. And if you followed any of the stats, some of the preliminary research into asking the question, why might the numbers of ordinands be lower? And it probably is a complex question, but the initial answer so far suggests that one of the reasons it might be lower is the perception of the well-being experience that they can anticipate in the church. People who are considering the call of Jesus are looking to people already in that ministry, and they're asking themselves, does that look and feel healthy? Do I want to be part of that, or do I not? I think more research is needed, but we should be at least considering that. The author Carey Nieuwhof says this: no one in his or her 20s sets out to end up feeling empty or cynical. I don't know of any college graduates who want to become irrelevant and morally compromised before their 40th birthday. I can't imagine men and women of any age who want their personal relationships to collapse under the weight of pride or the lack of basic emotional intelligence. Yet each of those things happens every day to people we know, people we care about, people we love. Actually, it might be happening to you right now, though you remain completely unaware, because that's exactly how it happens. Friends, how are you doing? You might be struggling now. And if you're not, there's every chance, if there are many years of ministry ahead of you, that at some point you might be struggling in one way or another. How well are you equipped to respond to that? How well are we equipped to walk through those things together? In fact, it's a tragedy that many Christian people do not finish well. Often we are casualties of this wonderful ministry that we have felt called to serve. Well, if we think of the enemies of our faith, I think if the enemies of healthy leadership confronted us in the face, we might do a really good job of rejecting them, but often they slip in subtly and secretly and slowly. And of course, every culture and demographic, every age, every person is different. But there are some areas that through the history of the church have been acknowledged as the common zones of difficulties that Christian people and Christian ministers face. They are described sometimes as the world, the flesh, and the devil. They're sometimes called the unholy trinity. They're in fact the three things we renounce in baptism vows. Thomas Aquinas called them the three implacable enemies of the soul. And here's a quote from J.C. Ryle, who says this in Victorian gush. The principal fight of the Christian is with the world, the flesh, and the devil. These are your never-dying foes. These are the three chief enemies against whom the Christian must wage war. Unless you get the victory over all these three, all other victories are useless and vain. I wonder if we might just consider each of those briefly, what they might mean for us. First, the world. Romans 12, for example, do not conform any longer to this world. That's easier said than done, since we live in this world, this society, this place. We are surrounded by media, by messages, by values that are being communicated to us, by temptations, by things that might capture our dreams. And the danger is that perhaps only a few hours or even a few minutes of a week are focused on God, and so many other minutes and hours are stolen away by a different agenda, but one that isn't about following God. What are we watching on TV? What do you read? What adverts have you seen? Who do you look up to? What do you love? Who do you love? Who are your heroes? Who do you want to be like? Who do you spend time with? How do you invest your time? All good questions for us. The word worship is about what we give worth to. And those things that we give worth to are those things that we worship, and what we worship wins our heart. And so we have a challenge with the world as it's described. The next is the flesh. Galatians 5 gives a list of the works of the flesh. I won't read it, and I think it's a non-exhaustive list, by the way. I think there are other challenges as well. But we get the point that our flesh, our physical self, is not as strong as we might think, is imperfect, and perhaps is even weak. And of course, we are not separate from our bodies. We are absolutely intermeshed. It's not that I'm a spiritual person hidden inside a body. So what we do with our bodies and what our bodies experience is every bit as much of who we are as those things that we think and those things we might pray. I wonder what are the weaknesses of your flesh. Mine is biscuits, actually. My wife knows, don't leave biscuits in the house, because if she comes back, my willpower is about, it should be more, but my sin is gluttony. That's the sin I need to face. My family weakness is alcoholism. My dad was an alcoholic. His brother was an alcoholic. His brother was an alcoholic. Their cousin was an alcoholic. The other cousin was an alcoholic. I'm not an alcoholic, But as a young man, I realized that's the family trait that I need to resist. I need to keep an eye on that one. Because if I don't, then when I'm under pressure, that's something that my body might crave. So these are things like the weakness of our flesh. And I kind of think it's a bit like sports. Often we can deal with these things and we can kind of feel like, okay, I'll 100% resist something. I wonder if it's better to think of our bodies as something that we manage. I do a little bit of running, not that much. My wife's a very active runner. And the thing about the people in the running club is everyone who's they're all great runners, but most of them have got a weakness they're managing. It might be a left knee that's a bit dodgy in the winter, or it might be, the heel, and what happens is you manage it. You understand, okay, this knee is a bit weaker. It just is a bit weaker. So knowing that is a gift, because I can protect that knee. Maybe it needs some support, or maybe I need to avoid certain things at certain times, or I need to recognize the warning times. And I think similarly with the weakness of the flesh, it's about managing our body. Rather than saying, from now on, I will be pure, I will be untemptable. It's not realistic. Actually, you're setting yourself up for a fall. It's better to have a rule that says, don't leave biscuits in the house. And then, on the whole, that means Christian won't eat them. A silly example, I know, but whatever it might be in reality for you. And as I've been thinking, the third is, of course, the devil. In the Lord's Prayer, it's our daily prayer, deliver us from the evil one. And there are two dangers of the devil, aren't there? One is that we give him too much emphasis, and one is that we give no acknowledgement, as if there was nothing there to be concerned about. And just like in our prayers, that we can never know truly the results of our prayers, we actually can never know the impact of spiritual warfare, of whether the enemy is actually attacking our church or our ministry. And so we need to find that middle point. I think for me it's in the Lord's Prayer, that is a daily prayer. It's not even at the beginning, it's not highlighted, it's just tucked away in the middle. Deliver us from the evil one. But we need to acknowledge that there is a spiritual dimension as well to our ministry. And I'm sure you will know of examples where something amazing happened in terms of God doing something, and then it was almost like there was a counter-attack against that. And I want to throw it open for some discussion in a minute. I've been thinking about ministerial failure, so why we struggle for a while. And it's early days to make conclusions, but I've noticed two common scenarios that come up when I talk to people. The first is excusing little things. And the deception is that you're getting away with excluding little things. And what happens is it desensitizes you to the impact of greater things. Just a few extra drinks, just a bit of innocent flirting. I deserve that extra money, so I can keep that. I think that's for me, etc. The Song of Solomon puts it like this: catch the little foxes that ruin the vineyards. And so it's very easy to think it doesn't matter, or I'm getting away with it, or I can handle it. It's fine. Other people should worry, but I'm fine. I'll be okay. It's like the story of the frog, isn't it? You put a frog in boiling water, it jumps out. You put a frog in cold water and heat it up, then it gets cooked. If temptation in its full form presented itself in its face and said, I tempt you, you would know to push back. But if it just comes slowly, and you get away with it, and it's fine, and you can handle it, then that can overcome eventually. The second one, and I think perhaps is more common, I've found, is believing that you are the exception to the rule because God called you. I think the story I told you 20 years ago, I think the lie I believed was, God called me here, so this will be fine. It will be fine, because God called me here. And in that, I accepted, or I gave away my responsibility to be resilient for my friends, for myself. It's almost as if I say, well, God knows what would happen, so he wouldn't have put me in this situation. I wonder if we could move towards some discussion, and I'd love us to just break and just buzz in a moment with the person that's next to you and see where you are. I think there's a danger that we can whinge in this, and it's very easy to say, I blame the Church of England, or it's the diocese, or it's someone else. And so there may well be things we need to attend to in this era about the shape and the experience of ministry. It may be, for example, when people have too many parishes, too many responsibilities, that is too much and we need to look at it. But what I really want to focus on is more how we respond ourselves. How do we strengthen ourselves? How do we walk through difficulties well? How as a community can we serve and help one another so that we don't hear unnecessary stories of people who were taken out because something happened in their life, in their family, in their ministry that became a difficulty for them. So let's pause there. Do you want to turn to the person next to you, or maybe just see who's around you? And let's take 2 or 3 minutes just to buzz with this topic of resilience. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? What questions do you want to ask? What comments or what do you want to contribute to that discussion? And then we'll open it up to see where we can go together as a group. Okay? So over to you to chat to people near you. Okay, friends, let's hear from the room. It might be best if I come to you with the mics. So who would like to kick us off with some thoughts?
Just picking up something you said this morning about people need to be stretched or you might lose them, young leaders. So we just at the end of our conversation there was wanting to do the healthy stretch so that you're not understretched and bored and restless, but not overstretched and breaking. So finding the healthy degree of stretch is part of what we need to.
Well, I agree, because being stretched is part of developing, and actually to not be stretched opens the door for a kind of boredom and disillusionment, which could fit what we've described. And I also think I reflect on the students that come to college, and I would, if I could make sweeping changes to the way we did things, I would love, before someone comes to college, for that phase of training, for them to actually have had more opportunity to fail in a local church setting. I didn't have time in my seminar to talk about some of the failures of people we were raising up, because you do get them. But the kind of thing I felt was, you can fail while I'm here, because I'm a safety net. We can pick you up, and through that you can learn some of your limits. You can learn that you're not invincible, that it won't always go right. And actually, so all of us, I think, to get strong, actually have to have failed or struggled somewhat in order to have strengthened and identified our boundaries. And so creating that environment is quite complex. I think I put in a Church Times article on Friday, I think a key question to ask of an ordinand candidate is, have they been tested? Because if someone hasn't been tested, the danger is the first time you're tested might be when you're the incumbent, and at that point you're discovering what happens when I'm under great pressure, or when I don't know what to do, or I feel like I've made a big mistake. And at that point, the risks are incredibly high. The risks of that are very different if you're learning at an earlier stage, in a sense, in someone else's environment.
Yeah, resilient, I think, and trust in God kind of go hand in hand, but also how far to trust in God and how far you trust your system and your support mechanism. In one of my parish roles, I was a couple of years in, and everything that could go wrong was going wrong. Nothing was working. So I decided to go and see my bishop and said to Bishop, this is not working, this is not working, this is not working, so I don't think I'm the right person. So Bishop, we had a conversation and we went through and we worked out what actually is needed to support me in all this. And he assured me, actually, it is you. And next 5 years in that role completely transformed my ministry and the parish. So he knew how far I could stretch, which I possibly myself had not seen that. And that worked. So it was faith in God. It was working hard and knowing how far I could be stretched. And then relying on that sport. I think sometimes it's that sport which is missing, which make people break. So if you can identify your sport alongside trust in God, then I think that would be helpful.
Thank you, Javid. There's an American author, Robert J. Clinton, who did some research on resilience, and his conclusion was one of the most significant things you can do to strengthen yourself is to have a small group of peer friends that you meet with regularly. And a lot of us have that, but often, sometimes people don't. And so when something happens, they don't have somewhere to go for someone to carry them a bit through a season when they need a bit more. Let's hear from a few others. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I'm a year 2 curate, and I'm really at the beginning of my ministry, but really trying to learn the delicate balance, really, because I was looking forward to coming today, but on the other hand, I was thinking that 7 hours that I could be at home preparing, and how am I going to fit A, B, and C in? How's that going to all work? And talking to my new friend here, who's a church warden in Interregnum, and we were talking about how challenging it is getting the balance between family when we have issues at home and our ministry as well, and what we do in our churches. That it's a real careful balancing act that I'm still learning and making mistakes and learning as I go along. I think one of the things that has started to strengthen is what you've just said, which is what made me put my hand up, was about having that core group of colleagues, of friends, which we've started to develop. And we went out last night, 3-4 of us, the curates, and having that close-knit group of where we can talk about things together in an open environment. I've found that really helpful, and that's something that we're learning to develop now as we go through our second year in curacy.
Thank you so much. One of the things I put in place after the story I told you was to be part of a prayer triplet where we each are equal, supporting each other, and that's helped each of us through the ups and downs when maybe there's a season when we all need a little bit of extra help or some truth-telling or some encouragement or some extra prayer, just to know that somebody's there for us. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. Let's have some other thoughts. John. You would sit over the wrong side of the room, wouldn't you, John?
I think just knowing what you're rubbish at is really helpful. So when I realised that I wasn't a pastor, I didn't have pastoral skills, very very much, and my pastoral skills that I did have, I had to work really hard at. And then I married a pastor and saw what a real pastor looked like. And I think what I've realised is knowing that if you're rubbish at something, you're more likely to look for other people to work with you in a team. And so if you know that that thing is not your skill, then you can look for somebody in your church and say, look, I can't do this. I can't do this, so can you help me do this? And I think otherwise the danger is that we try and find all sorts of ways to support ourselves in doing everything, when in fact what we should be doing is we're looking for other people who complement us. And I found that through getting married, but I'm sure there's other ways of doing it.
Thanks, John. And I think for those that are priests, we are also presbyters. I find that word actually really helpful because it reminds us that we're in it together, that it's teamwork, not the solo effort. We got some comments from online.
Yep, I'll just nip up on the stage so the cameras can see me for those online. So there's a comment here from Eleanor Robertshaw. She says that she finds it's not helpful to use the language of failure and success. We need to be reflective and see what we learn from difficult and testing times. As someone who was almost burnt out, it was not a failure, it was a set of circumstances that converged. If I were to hear then that I was a failure, it might have meant that I never returned to ministry. And then we have a question from Julie Bacon. She says, Christian, you're talking about resilience in personal individual terms, and I'm concerned that being just another thing on the already lengthy to-do list. What is the communal dimension to resilience?
To the first question, the language is really key, isn't it? And I'm very aware it's hard to find language. If we use the word failure, it can reflect something. Success. What on earth does success mean? So that's perhaps something we need to work on and develop. The corporate dimension of resilience, I think, is really important. One of the things I found really helpful is reading some of Edwin Freeman's research. He was a Jewish family therapist, and he did help with families, so with groups. So he's dealing with the culture of a group, and he's the guy that developed this thinking called non-anxious leadership, which doesn't mean not getting stressed. It's an active posture of leadership that's about how we respond to things that are difficult and challenging, and it's about the dynamic within a group. And I think that's something we need to learn more about. We've all known situations, family, friends, even church, where we go into a room or a meeting and you can feel the anxiousness in the place. And we've also all known at times when we've seen the opposite, where perhaps even because one person's there, it changed. One of the interesting things about Edwin Freeman's research is in families that had a dysfunction challenge, he said often the person that brought the non-anxious presence, the positive presence, wasn't a person in a leadership role like a parent. He said it was often a child. And that's a really interesting thought, that actually you don't need to be in charge of the thing to positively change the culture of the environment. Actually, there's potential for anyone in a group, a small group, a church, a meeting, a team, whatever it might be, to actually be a really positive influence of non-anxiety into that group. We've got time maybe for a couple more questions or comments, if there were. Thank you.
I'm a Roman Catholic deacon. I never make a mistake because I don't do anything. Recently, we have our parish priest. There were two parish priests, and one has just left, been transferred, and now we are left with just one parish priest. It's a big parish, St. St. Peter in Chains in Doncaster. And I have come there for quite some times now. And it is the baptism, funerals, then visiting the sick, taking communion to the people who are in nursing homes. And these are the things, it's not that you do once and then you just stop it. You have to do it continuously. And sometimes I felt, it is burdensome. But then one thing which in our culture, the Asian culture, is something very special. We depend more on relationships. And these relationships are good. But here it is different now, because everybody is on his own, and so they don't have time that we normally, the Asians, have time to spend with each other. But these problems, when this is too much, preparing sermon also and all that, it made me at times, when I felt, oh, I can't do it. And I went to the parish priest and I told him, sorry, I can't cope with it. He said, why you are saying that? I am here. I said, thank you very much. Then you gave me all these things to me. You should have, but you never said that you can't do these things. I said, you are right. So with him and with another deacon, we all sat together just a few days back, and we made all the list, who is doing what and how. And I feel it very light now. And it is, as you said, the sharing with people, bringing with the group and all, we can overcome this anxiety and all that, you see, and can make life easier than we think.
Thank you, my friend. I think we're actually close to time to stop. Maybe just worth just saying a few things to reinforce. I think this is such an important topic, but we haven't bottomed it out. But I think we need to keep thinking and talking about it, because I think it feels like this is increasing, certainly for some people in some places. And for all that I long to press into the adventurous future of the church, I don't want to do that in such a way that we generate more casualties. And so we need to learn how to prepare well, how to support well, and how to be together in ministry. I think if I can reflect on my own understanding from my own experiences, having some friends that I can go to is significant. And that's helped me so much. And if I could give one piece of advice to any ordinand or anyone else, I would say, cultivate that. Find that group where you are peers. You have helpful relationships with all sorts of people, but this is a group where you are equally there for each other. It's private, and you get to know each other. And my prayer triplet that I'm in, the great thing is they know me really well, so I can't make stuff up. They'll go, that's not true, Christian. That's not what you think at all. And they'll keep me on the straight and narrow. I think good old-fashioned rhythms, spiritual disciplines, prayer life. Do you watch more television than you pray? What do you read? When you're under pressure, knowing yourself, what happens when you're under pressure? What gives away? And learning to see the signs of that so you can respond if you need to. And as John said, having a really honest inventory of your weaknesses. You don't necessarily need to tell anyone that, but do you understand where you, as a particular person, are maybe not as strong as someone else? And so those are the things that you need to protect, you need to manage, and you need to keep them safe. Friends, can I pray for us? I'm just because I've spoken about that, I would be happy to speak to anyone if they wanted to have a quiet word. I can empathize if you're struggling. My heart's with you, and I'd love to support you if that's needed. I'll be around at the end to chat. May we pray together. Father, help us as we've thought from the beginning of this day to understand what it means to walk closely with you, to be strengthened and refreshed in our relationships with you, and to have a sober assessment of our lives, to know that we need each other, to know those things we need to invest and give ourselves to in order to be effective and useful in your service. And help us again, as we heard this morning, to be humble and kind with each other. That we would be a community of people where if someone was struggling, our heart is with them, and that we help one another. That we could be a supportive community. And may those that are considering future ministry look at us and see something attractive about what it means to walk after you, to follow in your footsteps, to be in your service. Amen.